In 1969, Mercury built a car that weighed 2.5 tons, stretched over 18 feet long, and packed a 429 cubic inch V8 engine under its hood. This beast was called the Marauder X-100, and it tried to do something almost impossible. It wanted to be a muscle car and a luxury cruiser at the same time. For 2 short years, this massive machine roamed American highways, turning heads with its hidden headlights and matte black rear end. Then it vanished, forgotten by almost everyone except a small group of enthusiasts who still remember when Mercury tried to build the ultimate road warrior. The Marauder X-100 arrived at a strange moment in automotive history. It came too late to the party, and that party was already ending. This is the story of Mercury's forgotten muscle tank, a car that had everything except good timing. The late 1960s was an absolutely wild time for American cars. Detroit was in the middle of the muscle car wars, and every manufacturer was trying to stuff bigger engines into everything they built. Horsepower was the only number that mattered. Gas was cheap, highways were new and smooth, and nobody cared about fuel economy or emissions. If you wanted to sell cars in 1969, you needed power, style, and attitude. But by 1969, something was changing. The muscle car craze was shifting away from the big, heavy, full-size cars toward smaller, lighter machines. The Ford Mustang, Chevrolet Camaro, and Plymouth Roadrunner were stealing all the attention. These cars were quicker, cheaper, and easier to handle than their massive predecessors. Young buyers loved them because insurance companies did not charge as much to cover a smaller car, even if it had a big engine. At the same time, another trend was taking over the market. The personal luxury coupe was becoming popular. These were big 2-door cars that combined sporty looks with comfortable interiors and smooth rides. Think of them as muscle cars wearing tuxedos. The Buick Riviera, Oldsmobile Toronado, and Ford Thunderbird were selling well in this category. These cars appealed to buyers who wanted performance but also wanted leather seats, wood trim, and air conditioning. They were for people who had grown up driving hot rods but now had families and careers. Mercury saw an opportunity here. The division already sold the sporty Mercury Cougar, which was basically a fancier Ford Mustang. They also had the ultra-expensive Lincoln Continental Mark III at the top of the luxury ladder. But there was nothing in between. Mercury needed a car for someone who had graduated from stripped-down drag racers but still wanted scary power when they pressed the gas pedal. To fill this gap, Mercury decided to revive an old name from its past. The Marauder badge had appeared on Mercury performance models in the mid-1960s, but it disappeared after 1965 when the market for huge, sporty cars seemed to die. In the spring of 1969, Mercury brought the name back to life. The word marauder means a raider or an outlaw, someone who takes what they want by force. It was a perfect name for a car that promised to dominate the highway. This new Marauder was not a completely fresh design built from scratch. Mercury did what it usually did back then. It took existing parts from Ford and Mercury full-size cars and mixed them together to create something unique. The basic body shape came from Ford's big 1969 2-door models, but Mercury added its own distinctive styling touches. The front end came from the Mercury Marquis sedan, with hidden headlights and a long hood. The rear featured a fastback roofline with flying buttress pillars that gave the car a sleek, sporty profile. Mercury made one important change to the car's proportions. They shortened the wheelbase to 121 inches, about 3 inches shorter than the Mercury Marquis sedan platform. The wheelbase is the distance between the front and rear wheels, and a shorter wheelbase usually means better handling. Of course, this was still a gigantic car. It measured over 18 feet from bumper to bumper and weighed around 4,300 pounds, but the slightly trimmer wheelbase was meant to make it feel more like a sports car and less like a luxury barge. The Marauder came in 2 versions. The base model was nice enough, but the X-100 was the star of the show. The X-100 cost about $700 more than the regular Marauder, starting at around $4,091 in 1969. That was serious money back then, close to what you would pay for a Cadillac. But the X-100 came loaded with performance upgrades and luxury features that the base model did not have. The X-100 label sounded futuristic and exotic, like some kind of experimental rocket ship. Mercury knew how to sell dreams. From the moment you saw the Marauder X-100, you knew it was different. This car had serious presence. The front end featured hidden headlights that sat behind doors in the grille. When the lights were off, the nose looked smooth and intimidating, almost like the car was squinting at you with a menacing glare. When you turned the lights on, those heavy lids opened up, and the car suddenly looked awake and ready to pounce. The hood was long and wide, with a slight power dome rising in the center. This hinted at the massive engine sitting underneath. The side profile was surprisingly sleek for such a giant automobile. The roofline swept back in a fastback style, with tall flying buttress pillars framing a deeply sunken rear window. This design was trendy in the late 1960s, giving cars a jet-age appearance. The rear window sat in a tunnel between those buttresses, creating dramatic shadows and angles. It made the car look fast even when it was standing still. One of the most distinctive features of the X-100 was its matte black rear deck treatment. Mercury painted the entire rear panel, including the trunk lid and the area around the taillights, in a flat black sports tone finish. This contrasted sharply with the body color and made the full-width taillights pop. It looked like war paint on a battle-ready machine. The base Marauder offered this as an option, but the X-100 came with it standard in 1969. The taillights stretched across the entire width of the car, emphasizing just how broad this Mercury was. When someone saw the Marauder X-100 from behind, they saw a wide, aggressive stance with big Marauder letters on the trunk and that menacing blackout panel. The car also came with rear fender skirts as standard equipment on the X-100. These were body-colored panels that covered the upper half of the rear wheels, giving the car a smooth, flowing silhouette. The X-100 also featured special Kelsey Hayes 15-inch aluminum alloy road wheels. These were fancy and rare, quite unusual for a car this size in 1969. Most big cars rolled on steel wheels with chrome hubcaps, but the X-100 got sporty alloy wheels that peeked out from under those fender skirts. Put it all together and the Marauder X-100 looked like a land battleship. At nearly 80 inches wide and sitting low to the ground, it dominated the road. Car enthusiasts today say that if you find one painted in glossy black, it truly looks like a menacing warship cruising down the highway. Writers at the time called these cars great, honking motherships. That description fits perfectly. While the exterior looked ready for battle, the interior was designed for comfort and luxury. Mercury wanted buyers to feel like they were sitting in a Lincoln, not a stripped-down muscle car. The seats were huge and cushy, upholstered in rich materials that felt more like living room furniture than car seats. The base Marauder came with a wide front bench seat that could fit 3 people across, with deep tufted cushions covered in cloth and vinyl. Thick pile carpeting covered the floor and ran up the lower door panels. The dashboard and door trim featured imitation burled walnut wood accents to create a high-class atmosphere. The X-100 package took the interior even further. Buyers could choose from 3 different seating configurations. The twin comfort lounge option gave you a split front bench seat with 2 separate seat backs and a center armrest. The passenger side seat back could even recline, which was a novelty feature in 1969. The second option was a full-width bench seat with fold-down armrests on each side, trimmed in a combination of leather and vinyl for a premium feel. The third option was sporty front bucket seats, available in all vinyl or optional leather trim, paired with a center console. If you ordered the bucket seats, the console housed a unique U-shaped shifter for the automatic transmission. Mercury called it a horseshoe-shaped selector, and some people nicknamed it the stirrup shifter. This stylish touch gave the driver a sense of commanding a serious performance machine. The X-100 also came with a special 3-spoke rim-blow steering wheel. You could sound the horn by squeezing anywhere on the rim of the wheel, which felt futuristic and cool. The dashboard featured simple gauges by modern standards. You got a speedometer, fuel gauge, temperature gauge, and maybe a clock. But the car came with plenty of convenience features for the time. Available options included air conditioning, power windows, power seats, and an AM/FM radio. All of these made long highway trips comfortable and enjoyable. And long trips were exactly what the Marauder X-100 was built for. The trunk offered 18 cubic feet of cargo space, enough to swallow multiple suitcases with ease. The fuel tank held a massive 24 gallons, which was necessary because this car drank gasoline like water. Mercury was trying to create the best of both worlds. You could have Lincoln-like luxury and muscle car performance in the same package. You did not have to suffer in a basic, stripped-down racer. You could have power and pampering at the same time. Of course, no muscle-oriented car in 1969 could claim any credibility without a serious engine under the hood. The Marauder X-100 delivered in spectacular fashion. The base Marauder models came with Ford's old 390 cubic-inch V8 as standard equipment. The 390 was a reliable workhorse engine, but with a two-barrel carburetor it only made around 265 horsepower. That was adequate for moving such a heavy car, but not exactly thrilling. The X-100 came standard with something much more powerful. Under that long hood sat the 429 cubic-inch Cobra Jet V8 engine. This was a 7.0-liter big block monster with a 4-barrel carburetor, high 10.5-to-1 compression ratio, and dual exhausts. Mercury rated it at 360 horsepower and an absolutely massive 480 pound-feet of torque. That torque figure was elephantine, as one writer described it. In a car weighing 4,300 pounds, you needed every bit of that twist to get the beast moving with authority. The beauty of having 480 pound-feet of torque was how it delivered power. Peak torque came at a relatively low 2,800 revolutions per minute. This meant the X-100 could surge forward with just a gentle squeeze of the throttle, even at highway speeds. You could be cruising along at 60 miles per hour or 96 kilometers per hour, press the accelerator to pass a slower car, and the big Mercury would effortlessly leap ahead. The engine did not need to scream or strain. It just delivered a smooth, relentless wave of power that pushed you back in those plush seats. Mercury paired the 429 engine with Ford's Select Shift 3-speed automatic transmission. A manual transmission was technically available in the base Marauder, but almost nobody ordered it. By 1969, buyers of full-size luxury cars wanted smooth automatics, and the Select Shift was a good unit. If you ordered the console-mounted shifter, it gave a satisfying click as you moved through the gears. A limited-slip rear differential called Posey traction was optional, along with various axle ratios. Many X-100 models came with a 2.80-to-1 rear axle gear, which was great for relaxed highway cruising at lower engine speeds. But enthusiasts could order a shorter 3.25-to-1 gear ratio along with the traction lock differential, which improved acceleration times but hurt fuel economy and top speed. So how did all this power translate to actual performance? Pretty impressive numbers for the era, especially given the car's substantial bulk. Contemporary road tests showed that a Marauder X-100 could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour or 0 to 96 kilometers per hour in around 7.5 to 8.0 seconds. That was quick for a 2.5-ton land yacht. The quarter-mile could be covered in the mid-15-second range, with a trap speed of about 88 miles per hour or 141 kilometers per hour. And if you found a long, empty stretch of highway, the big Mercury could reach a top speed of about 125 to 126 miles per hour, or 201 to 202 kilometers per hour, before running out of steam. These numbers put the Marauder X-100 in respectable company among late 1960s performance cars. It was not the quickest car on the drag strip. Smaller, lighter muscle cars like the Plymouth Road, Runner, or Chevrolet Chevelle SS could beat it in a straight line. But for such a massive, heavy machine, the acceleration was genuinely impressive. The 429 engine's enormous torque made the car feel powerful even when you were not racing. This was a machine that felt happiest roaring down the interstate at 80 or 90 miles per hour. effortlessly eating up the miles while other cars moved aside. All that muscle came with a price, and not just the sticker price of the car. The real cost was paid at the fuel pump. The Marauder X-100 was incredibly thirsty. With high compression and a big 4-barrel carburetor gulping fuel, it delivered terrible gas mileage. Road testers in 1969 observed as low as 10 miles per gallon in mixed driving. But in the late 1960s, almost nobody cared about fuel economy. Gasoline was cheap and plentiful, and performance was all that mattered. Mercury included that huge 24-gallon fuel tank so you could still drive a decent distance between fill-ups, despite the guzzling appetite. In terms of handling and ride quality, the Marauder X-100 was designed more for comfort and stable cruising than tight cornering. It came standard with heavy-duty shocks and wide tread tires. Buyers could also check a box for the competition suspension option, which cost about $31 extra. This upgraded the car with stiffer springs, firmer shocks, and a thicker anti-sway bar. Magazine testers reported that this suspension option provided very reassuring control over bumps and kept the body from bouncing around too much. Even so, physics is physics. The Marauder was a big, nose-heavy car, and it exhibited noticeable understeer and body lean in sharp turns no matter what suspension you ordered. Understeer means the front end wants to plow straight ahead instead of turning sharply. The car's new perimeter frame with extra reinforcement did help maintain a smooth ride and solid feel, which were hallmarks of Mercury's traditional ride quality. So while you would not want to toss this 18-foot giant through a twisty mountain road, it gave you a quiet, steady ride on the open highway. Straight-line speed and highway comfort were the X-100's strengths. Tight corners were not its happy place, but that was true of virtually all its competitors as well. When the Mercury Marauder X-100 debuted in 1969, it entered a market that was already shrinking and changing direction. Mercury was trying to sell a type of car that had peaked a few years earlier. In the early 1960s, big, high-performance coupes had been popular. Chevrolet and Pontiac had offered sporty versions of their full-size cars that sold well. But by 1969, most buyers who wanted performance were looking at smaller, more nimble machines. The muscle car market had moved on. The Marauder X-100's real competition was not the famous pony cars and muscle cars. It was competing against other personal luxury coupes. The Buick Riviera, Oldsmobile Toronado, and Ford Thunderbird were all large, powerful two-door cars with upscale features and sporty styling. The new 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix was also in this category. It was slightly smaller than the Marauder, had a lower price tag, and became a massive sales success that year. Against this backdrop, the Marauder X-100 faced serious challenges. Mercury priced the X-100 at around $4,091 to start in 1969. The base Marauder was cheaper at about $3,368, but once you added popular options like air conditioning, power accessories, leather seats, and other goodies, the X-100 could easily cost over $5,000. That kind of money put you within $1,000 of a Cadillac or Lincoln. It was also very close to what a Thunderbird or Buick Riviera cost. In other words, the Marauder was not a bargain. It was competing dollar for dollar with cars that had much more prestigious reputations. The Pontiac Grand Prix, notably, started under $3,900 and offered a sporty image with slightly smaller dimensions. It sold incredibly well. Mercury's big Bruiser, on the other hand, struggled to find buyers. The production numbers tell the story. In 1969, Mercury managed to sell fewer than 15,000 Marauders total for the model year. Sources cite about 14,666 units. Of those, the X-100 accounted for only 5,635 units. To put that in perspective, Mercury sold nearly 173,000 Cougar pony cars in 1969 and 1970 combined. Pontiac sold over 112,000 Grand Prix models in 1969 alone. The Marauder was truly a low-volume niche product. In 1970, things got much worse. The appetite for big performance cars continued to shrink. Mercury sold just 6,043 Marauders total in 1970. and only 2,646 of those were the X-100 version. Sales fell by more than 50% compared to the previous year. By 1970, the X-100 actually made up a larger chunk of Marauder sales, about half of all Marauders sold that year. This indicated that the few people still buying Marauders were choosing the fully loaded model. For Mercury, these numbers were deeply disappointing. The Marauder represented only a tiny fraction of Mercury's overall sales. In 1969, it was around 3% of the division's total volume. So why did the car fail to attract buyers? Several reasons become clear when you look back at the market conditions. First, the trend toward big, sporty coupes was already dying by 1969. One automotive historian called the segment utterly moribund by the time the Marauder reappeared. Mercury was arriving late to a party that was almost over. Second, the Marauder lacked the brand prestige of some rivals. Mercury was a mid-tier brand. It was not as prestigious as Cadillac or Lincoln, and it was not as youth-oriented as Pontiac or Dodge. Some critics pointed out that the Marauder was essentially a Ford with makeup, meaning it was very similar to Ford models but dressed up with Mercury styling and badges. Consumers might have realized they could get a similar car for less money, or they chose the more established names in the personal luxury field. Third, the timing was terrible regarding insurance and regulations. By 1970, muscle cars in general were facing new pressures. Insurance companies charged enormous premiums for high-horsepower machines. Young buyers especially got sticker shock when they tried to insure something with a 429 V8 engine. Also, 1970 was the last year before emissions rules and lower-lead gasoline began forcing compression ratios down across the industry. The mood was beginning to turn against high-power, high-displacement engines. The Marauder arrived just as the muscle party was winding down, so it had little time to build an audience. Fourth, Mercury had internal competition. The Cougar was a much smaller and cheaper performance car, and it was extremely successful in the late 1960s. If a buyer wanted a fast Mercury, a Cougar Eliminator might be more appealing. If they wanted luxury, a Marquis Bruham or a Lincoln might beckon. The Marauder tried to straddle both desires, but it ended up appealing strongly to relatively few people. Maybe older drivers who had owned muscle cars in their youth and now wanted something bigger and more comfortable. Or Mercury loyalists who wanted the top-of-the-line coupe. That was a narrow demographic. Reception in the automotive press was mixed. Performance was generally praised. Reviewers liked the strong acceleration and effortless highway cruising. The comfortable ride and luxury features also got positive comments. But journalists also noted the car's massive size and terrible fuel consumption. Car and Driver and Motor Trend found the handling to be sloppy and suitable more for straight-line blasts than curvy roads, which was not unexpected. By 1970, any enthusiasm for big muscle luxury cars had faded, and the Marauder largely flew under the radar. Mercury did not promote it heavily after the initial launch. It seems even the company knew this was going to be a short-lived venture. Mercury carried the Marauder X-100 into the 1970 model year with very few changes. Visually, the 1970 Marauders looked almost identical to the 1969 models. One subtle difference involved that matte black rear paint scheme. For 1970, Mercury made the sports tone blackout an optional delete on the X-100. This means buyers could choose to have the entire car painted in one color instead of the two-tone look with the black rear deck. Some buyers in 1970 evidently preferred a more formal, single-color appearance, especially if they added the optional vinyl roof. Roughly half of the 1969 to 1970 X-100 models ended up without the black rear treatment. Mechanically, the 1970 X-100 was essentially the same. It still packed the 429 V8 rated at 360 horsepower. There was no detuning yet. That would come in 1971 across the entire industry. Ford introduced the 429 Super Cobra jet engine for certain models in 1970, but the Marauder did not get that race-bred variant. It stuck with the standard 429 four-barrel engine. Mercury may have slightly reduced the advertised pricing on the Marauder in 1970 to attract more buyers, but if they hoped for better sales, they were disappointed. As noted earlier, sales plummeted to roughly one-third of the previous year's numbers. By the end of 1970, Mercury executives had seen enough. The Marauder and the X-100 were discontinued. For 1971, Mercury completely reshuffled its full-size lineup. The emphasis moved to more traditional luxury and size, without the sporty pretenses. In fact, the early 1970s brought even bigger Mercurys. The Marquis and Monterey grew in dimensions and focused on comfort as the industry shifted toward plush land yachts that were increasingly smog-controlled and slower. The Marauder name was shelved. Mercury did not see a place for a big performance coupe in the new decade. One insider described that Mercury's bosses wanted to chase buyers who were priced out of a Lincoln. The division pivoted to making gun-place. Mercury, a sort of junior Lincoln, with lots of luxury touches but without bothering with performance. The Marauder X-100, being a performance-oriented model, did not fit that new vision. Thus, 1970 was the swan song of Mercury's experiment in this arena. As one article later noted, these sumo-sized sporty cars had outlived their usefulness by 1970. The era of the true muscle car would itself soon end. By 1972 and 1973, insurance costs and emission laws really killed off high-compression engines, and horsepower ratings dropped dramatically across the board. In a way, the Marauder X-100 was one of the last of the dinosaurs. It was a big V8, big-bodied brute, built right before the performance collapse of the early 1970s. After 1970, the Mercury Marauder name went dormant for a long time. The nameplate would not appear again until 2003, when Mercury introduced a modern Marauder as a high-performance version of the Grand Marquis sedan. That 2003 to 2004 Marauder was a cool tribute with a supercharged V8, but it only lasted for 2 years as well. For decades, the 1969 to 1970 Marauder X-100 remained a bit of an obscure footnote in muscle car history, known mainly to Mercury enthusiasts and hardcore collectors. However, in recent years, people have started to appreciate this unique car more. Because it was produced in such low numbers and many lived hard lives as daily drivers or hand-me-down cars during the 1970s gas crisis era, the Marauder X-100 is quite rare today. Finding one in good, original condition is difficult. Very few come up for sale each year. Restoration can also be challenging because certain X-100 specific parts were never reproduced. The special Kelsey Hayes wheels, unique trim pieces, and that horseshoe shifter console are hard to find. Enthusiasts who own Marauder X-100 models often share stories about sourcing trim pieces or badges turning into treasure hunts. Sometimes the only solution is finding someone who has a parts car or getting lucky at a swap meet. Despite the challenges, the Marauder X-100 has a small but devoted following. At car shows, it is an attention grabber due to its sheer size and uncommon looks. People who have never seen one might mistake it for a customized Ford or even a concept car because it is not instantly recognizable like a Mustang or Camaro. Collectors value the Marauder X-100 as a conversation piece. It represents an era when bigger and bolder was the mantra, and it wears one of the coolest names ever put on a trunk lid. As one automotive writer noted, Marauder is pretty badass for a car name. The full name, Marauder X-100, sounds like a rocket ship or a top-secret military project, which only adds to the mystique. In terms of collectability, these Mercurys have historically been more affordable than many popular muscle cars, probably due to being lesser known. For someone who wants a late 1960s performance car but needs lots of space and loves the unusual, an X-100 can be a tempting choice. Driving one is a unique experience. You feel the weight and the floaty ride, but also the tidal wave of torque when you press the accelerator. It is simultaneously luxurious and a little bit unruly, like a gentleman boxer in a fine suit. Today, if you see a Marauder X-100 in person, it has likely been lovingly maintained or restored. Owners often highlight the car's paint, especially those who keep the matte black rear panel for authenticity. The unique interior with the horseshoe shifter and luxurious seats always draws attention. And that big 429 engine bay, usually featuring a giant air cleaner labeled 429 4-barrel, meaning 4-barrel carburetor, is proudly displayed at shows.